Officers, councillors, members of the public, thank you all for coming to give your representations today. My name is Rob Bryant. I'm the chair of the committee, councillor for St George West. Just wanted to go around and have introductions to start with, so everyone knows who everyone is. I'll start on the left here with Jeremy, and we'll go around this way, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Livett from the Democratic Services team. I'm clerking the meeting.
Councillor Richard Eddy.
Councillor Serena Ralston, Clifton Down.
Councillor Ellie Freeman, Bedminster.
Councillor Sarah Classic, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park.
Councillor Darrell Stayataman Grabi from Vale.
Councillor Zoe Pete, Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston.
Councillor Katya Hanshian, Brislington East.
Yeah, can you just okay. Sorry.
Simon Wilding, Chief Planner.
Jim Cliff, Planning Obligations Manager.
I'm Tom Wilkinson, I'm the Planning Case Officer for the first item.
I'm Jonathan Diamond, from Development Management.
Great, thanks everyone. Who's been waved in? Oh, sorry, just wait for Guy to come as well. While Guy's just sitting down. We aren't expecting any reason to leave for fire or anything like that, but in the unlikely event that does happen, just leave by the main entrance that you probably came in, and then congregate by the cathedral. There is a space there for it. Guy, we were just introducing ourselves, so do you just want to say who you are?
Councillor Houltney, Cotton Woods, subbing in at least for as long as I can today for Councillor Carshawn.
Thanks. That's what I was just about to come to Jeremy to say, but you can say it as well.
Yes, we've got one apology. Councillor Cascione and Councillor Guy Poultney is substituting for him.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. Does any councillor here have a declaration of interest to make? Yep. Al?
Yes, so from Vale is actually adjacent to the project, the development project, and I've also spoken to the developers and the planning group. But I still haven't made up my mind. So yeah.
Thanks very much.
I live in the area, so I know the area well. I have been part of the planning group, but before this came to fruition, so I don't know nothing from the planning group on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any others on any other items on the agenda? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd of October 2024. We're wanting to agree the minutes, but I think there are a couple of potential changes we might need to make. So Jeremy's just going to go through those. Yes, Chair. The first one is the final bullet point of item 9A. There's a reference to Long Road. It's actually Long Row, and in fact there are 2 other references to Long Row as well, but that one wasn't picked up, so that needs to be altered. And in addition, the spokespersons are aware that one of the bullet points, the third bullet point for the Old Tavern item, item 9B, listing the councillors' comments on page 5, that, as councillors will be aware, they aren't attributed to individual councillors, but Councillor Hornchin was the councillor who made that particular comment, and it's suggested that it is reworded just to more accurately reflect what was actually said. And if I could just read out what that is, and then you can decide whether or not you're happy to approve it. Councillor concerns were noted about a bedroom being so close to a busy road with heavy traffic, although it was acknowledged that this is not a material consideration. Whilst it was noted that an assessment of living accommodation had deemed this satisfactory with sufficient light and was comparable to other areas where old buildings had been constructed before motorised traffic, the rules were problematic. So as long as councillors are happy with that. So councillors happy with that change? Okay, can I take it that with those 2 changes that the minutes from the last meeting are agreed?
Aye.
Thank you. I will sign this here, even though it will be changed.
Just to say, Chair, those changes are actually in there.
Oh, they're in there?
They're on the
Fantastic.
obviously.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is the action sheet. Can we just talk through anything that has come up on the action sheet, Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just an update on the action relating to the request for a briefing on enforcement. An invitation has now been sent by the member development team, which has gone to all councillors, which invites everyone to a briefing on the 5th of February next year. This will provide an update around the principles of enforcement and also the local enforcement plan, and also provide some further information around all of the work that's gone in, particularly over the last sort of 6 months or so, in relation to the backlog and the resourcing situation within the team.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on action sheet? No? Okay, so we're just requested to note that. And then the agenda item 6 is appeals. Again, this is just to note appeals lodged, imminent public inquiries and appeals waiting decision. Anyone got anything they'd like to ask or comment on that at this point? Yes.
I just wondered if you've got, just rough counting here, 9 dismissed, 10 allowed, 1 withdrawn. Is that the balance of, excuse me, allowed gone up a bit since last time? I just wondered if that was cause for concern or just average fluctuation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some sort of fluctuation there, but I think we have observed, you know, over the last few months, appeals allowed have been kind of higher as a proportion than really, we would like them to be. I mean, it is in part a result of some of the non-determination appeals that we had as a result of the backlog still sort of working their way through the system. But we've also been, really looking carefully at those appeals that have been allowed against the refusal of permission, just to understand the reasons for that, and if we need to kind of, sort of reflect on our approach to any various matters.
Okay, anything else on appeals? Thank you very much. We're just noting all of those. And agenda item 7 is enforcement. So it's just to note recent enforcement notices. And of course, as Jonathan just said, we do now have a date in a diary for actually going through all this and kind of thinking through it. But anyone got anything immediate that they want to raise? Anything they think is important to raise now? No? It's important. It's good to get a date in a diary because then everyone goes, that's a good time to talk about it. So that's agenda item 7. We've noted that. So now we are on to the first application, which is for 23/03104/P, graphic packaging. We have public forum statements for this item. Just to tell people who have gathered today, we take the public forum statements for each planning application just before we consider each planning application. So the first application today is graphic packaging. We'll take those forum statements now. Please try and keep your statements to 1 minute. We've got a little bit more wiggle room of time today, but please do try and keep them to around 1 minute. Just please summarise your statement. You don't need to read the whole thing out. Just say what you're trying to get across with your minute. Without further ado, I'll start with the first public forum statement, which is A1, Mark Ashdown. Is Mark here? No. Okay. We'll go on to A2, which is Laurie Strike.
Is this on? Yes.
Yes, it is, yeah.
So I'm speaking from the Fish Ponds Community Planning Group. We aim to encourage development that will be positive for the local community, both for current and future residents of Fish Ponds. We're pleased that the application to develop the GPI site proposes family homes and low-rise apartment blocks, and that there's been consideration for parking, highways, commercial and outside spaces. We wish to urge that before any higher density schemes come forward for the other 2 sites at Atlas Place, that there is a coordinated and cohesive master plan and a design code for the area that takes account of the 3 sites as a whole and within the context of the wider area, and also that there's transparency and engagement in its development, using the local knowledge of residents and businesses, and this needs to pay particular regard to the road network. In terms of the GPI application itself, we can confirm that it's appropriate in the local context and is supported by the local community.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Very good time as well. The next statement is A3. That's Councillor Ellie King, speaking on behalf of Councillor Lewis Martin.
Oh, on behalf of Louis first.
Oh yes, and then you'll do yours after, if that's all right.
Okay, sure. So, on behalf of Louis, who is a councillor for Froome Vale, which is neighbouring ward to Hillfields, he really wanted to welcome the commitment to healthcare provision, particularly recognising how oversubscribed the area is in the GP practices, ranging from 50% oversubscribed up to 70%. It's a real issue in the area, and so we really wanted to recognise that needs some attention. Really wanted to thank officers and graphic packaging for working on the affordable homes percentage, raising it from 15% to 22%. That's very welcome. And he really wanted to strongly advise developers to pursue government grants to uplift this further where possible. He wanted to express his concerns about the transport system and how we have inadequate bus services, lack of orbital routes as well as well-connected routes to the city centre, and the pressure that this might put on neighbouring wards, although it might not be a material consideration. Really wanted to have that as an ongoing conversation between the developers and the council and all our transport colleagues. And he also lastly wanted to express a concern about the master planning of the 3 sites. Graphic packaging forms one of 3 development sites that forms the entire Atlas Place development, and recognises that this isn't entirely in graphic packaging's control to make sure there's a cohesive design, but that it is important that the 3 sites work together in order to get a really cohesive plan that delivers for the community. But also, I know finally he wanted to thank you for your engagement from graphic packaging with local residents and councillors.
Thank you, Ellie. Do you want to just move straight on to your statement now, if that's okay? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, firstly, I wanted to really thank graphic packaging for the engagement they've done. It's been really consistent and really ongoing, not just with myself and Councillor Blake as councillors, but with the local planning group and with engagement sessions that they've run for the community, particularly to Martin Shepherd, who is the Director of Graphic Packaging. His sincerity to creating a legacy of family homes in the area, I don't doubt whatsoever. And also thank you for the significant long-term employment that's been brought to the ward and how that will continue at their new, and indeed increase at their new site in Yates. This is an ideal brownfield development site. If we're not developing here for homes, then I'm not sure where we are. This relieves pressure on a lot of our greenfield sites, greenbelt pressures, and it's exactly the prime location for development. It's going to bring new greenery, it will bring new hedges, new trees, new pocket parks, and an uplift of 117% BNG. Its connectivity to the fantastic railway path, one of our greatest assets in East Bristol for wheeled and walking transport, will be absolutely brilliant and very welcome. 22% affordable housing and roads designed with traffic calming measures, which personally I will massively welcome, as it's our biggest casework issue is unsafe driving in the ward. We really urge that there's continued engagement with community groups and ourselves to continue to ensure that the delivery matches the intentions. The design needs to be sensitive to the heritage of Hillfields. It's one of the original council estates, the Homes for Heroes development, and we would really like to be in keeping with that design. And so we really welcome the sort of family home approach and the low-rise approach to that. Okay. Transport and public transport really needs focus and attention. We're treating an outer suburb ward like it's an inner city centre development, and that without the additional infrastructure that comes with that, that needs to be recognised and focused on.
If you could draw your comments to a close, just...
Okay, my final point then. In our last meeting with graphic packaging, we managed to talk about the commercial aspect of the development, and they agreed to focusing that on as being a Class E development condition, which means it could be used for designated for healthcare provision. So that is an absolute win for us all. And if I could ask the committee if they are minded, after considering the application to approve, that they would ask for that condition to be applied to the development,
Okay.
that would be very much welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks very much. The next statement is A5 from Martin Shepherd.
Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Martin Shepherd. I'm General Manager of Graphic Packaging, Europe, Middle East and Africa. I've worked for Graphic Packaging for 43 years, starting as a young service engineer. Graphic Packaging is a great Bristol company which has employed generations of local people over the past century. Due to the age of our Fishpond site and modern production needs, after a 15-year search, we finally moved to our new production plant in Yate. This has been transformative. We've already recruited 100 more staff, promoted 32 and started 11 apprentices. During the planning process, we did not push for density or height because we want this to be a fantastic place for local people to live and enjoy. For Graphic Packaging and myself personally, I want this development to be a place my grandchildren may live one day and will be a legacy we all can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. The next statement is A6, Michelle Routley, sorry, I might have got that wrong.
Routley's correct. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm the Graphic Packaging's HR manager for the site. I cannot overstate how important our staff and their families have always been to GPI. Our employees and unions have been involved in the beginning of this relocation process, and I'm extremely pleased we've managed to keep all our staff. Our move has been a massive investment to people. Our new bespoke factory has already given us the space to employ a further 100 staff. As we're big believers in investing in our employees, with 32 existing members of staff promoted and now studying for MVQs, and 11 new apprentices, including 2 17-year-old trainee engineers, all since we moved in June. At GPI, we are proud to be a great employer. If you grant us planning permission, you will help us create more local jobs and continue to invest in our people, their families, and the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And statement A7 is Matt Tucker. Is Matt here? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm GPI's planning advisor. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers, ward councillors and the community planning group for working with us on the redevelopment proposals for this brownfield site, which is allocated for housing with business within your plan. There are 2 things that I'd like to briefly mention. Firstly, the scheme proposes 22% of affordable homes, and that's 56 homes, of which 24 will be family housing, something that Bristol is extremely short of which the officer describes as a rarity. The percentage of affordable housing has been agreed with officers through a viability assessment which accords with policy. Secondly, the NHS has advised that there is a need to expand healthcare provision locally. The proposal includes flexible employment floor space that could accommodate healthcare uses. The applicant is happy for the scheme to facilitate this and is pleased to see the principle carried through into planning conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. And there's finally a late statement that I took from Councillor Lorraine Francis. Don't think Lorraine's here, though. No. Okay. Thank you very much. That does conclude the public forum for this item. So I think I will pass it over to Tom, who will take us through this application with the full presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't know how to get this on screen. It's plugged in at the moment. Is there anything else I need to do?
Not sure. It's not coming up. Just bear with us a second. Technical hitch.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to ask members, have you all got your devices with you? Is it all right to just go through it that way? I'm sorry to the members of the public, but we just have obviously got a problem with connecting to the screen. It's not ideal. I don't like it, but it's where we are. Tom, are you all right to go through the presentation and then we'll just say next slide when we're on to the next slide, I guess? I'm really sorry about that. Okay, I'll pass over to you, sorry.
Okay, thank you. No, shall I just crack on?
I think so, yeah.
The first slide. So this is an application for outline planning permission for the demolition of the existing factory buildings at the application site of up to 252 use class C3 dwellings, as well as 190 square metres of flexible employment floor space. Being submitted in outline means that only certain aspects are being considered at this stage. With outline applications, there are 5 matters which are reserved for future assessment. These are referred to as reserved matters. In this instance, they are appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. The only matter being considered under the current application is access. Alongside access, there are other principal elements of the scheme which are being considered at this stage, such as the loss of existing uses, proposed new uses, the quantum of development, and key planning considerations such as flood risk, contaminated land, ecology, impact on trees, and other issues. These are all covered in the committee report. The site is located in Fish Ponds, northeast of Bristol city centre. The site is currently vacant, however, was recently occupied by the offices, manufacturing and distribution buildings that all form part of the Graphic Packaging International business. The existing business has recently relocated to a new larger site in Yate. There are other industrial buildings to the north and west of the site, and a more residential context is to the south and east. The site is bounded by 3 roads and separated from Lodge Causeway to the south by existing residential properties. This is an aerial view of the site. It's predominantly made up of 2 to 3 storey industrial style buildings, and you can see a bit of the wider context here. The surrounding residential properties to the south and east, and the industrial properties to the north. Not sure if you can see my cursor, but the Bristol to Bath railway path is running towards the top of the screen, and the Fish Ponds town centre is beyond that. So I'll just run through some existing site photos for some context. This is a view of the site from Filwood Road looking west. This is a fairly recent image. You can see that the site is currently boarded up with hoarding for security purposes. This is a view of the site, again looking along Filwood Road, this time from the east, looking east, and at the junction with Goodneskin Road, looking south, which is the road on the right-hand side of the image there. This is looking north up, looking south, approximately halfway down Goodneskin Road. The application site is on the left of the image. And this is looking north up Goodneskin Road, with the application site now on the right. And this is the corner of Enfield Road and Lodge Causeway, looking north. You can see the factory buildings that make up the application site in the distance along Enfield Road beyond the residential properties. And this is a closer view of the application site from Enfield Road on the left. And this final image is looking south down Enfield Road with the residential properties on the left and the application site on the right. Some relevant policy: the application site is allocated for development in the existing local plan. So the site allocation policy is shown on the left of the image on screen. The allocation is for housing with business uses, subject to the relocation of the existing business within the Bristol area. Various other issues are listed in the policy related to noise, pollution control, land stability and flood risk. The site also forms part of the Central Fish Ponds regeneration area, which is covered by draft policy DS7 in the emerging local plan. This policy hasn't been adopted yet and therefore has limited weight at present. However, it still provides some useful guidance on how sites in Central Fish Ponds should be developed moving forward. Some more wider context to be aware of. The site is one of 3 large industrial sites in Fish Ponds which are coming forward for development at around the same time. These are the graphic packaging site, so the application site, and also the Castell Limited site to the northwest, and the Central Fish Ponds site to the northeast. So together, these 3 sites make up approximately half of the area covered by the draft Central Fish Ponds policy. Given that these 3 sites are coming forward together at roughly the same time, the Council has asked the 3 landowners to work together to produce a regeneration framework to coordinate the approach to development across the area and its relationship with surrounding locations. This document, known as the Atlas Place Strategic Framework Vision Report, is still currently in draft format and hasn't been formally recognised or adopted by the Council yet. However, again, it also provides some useful guidance on how sites in Central Fish Ponds should be developed and includes general principles that should be followed for all sites. So the Council are still working with the 3 landowners on this document, and hopefully at some stage next year it'll be at a stage when it can be formally recognised. The other 2 sites are still at pre-application stage. There's been lengthy engagement with the landowners. Formal pre-apps have been submitted to the Council and we've provided various advice on those schemes. It's understood that applications for those sites will probably come forward at some point next year. So this application has been subject to 2 rounds of public consultation, given amendments made and further information submitted. The initial round of consultation generated 13 objections, 8 neutral comments and 14 letters of support, and reconsultation generated 7 objections. These comments are summarised in the committee report and are available to view in full online. So, as previously noted, this application is submitted in outline. Therefore, there are only certain aspects of the development which are being considered at this stage. The application is for up to 252 residential units and 190 square metres of commercial floor space. The layout plan on screen has been submitted to demonstrate how this quantum of development could be potentially achieved on site. However, please note this isn't submitted for approval at this stage, as appearance, layout and landscaping will be considered at a later stage under a separate application for reserved matters. The plan is, however, useful to demonstrate how the development could potentially be achieved, and given the site context, officers are satisfied that 252 dwellings could reasonably be accommodated on this site without resulting in any significant harm or issues. The existing business has relocated to Yate, which, whilst outside of the Bristol boundary, is within the wider Bristol area as identified by the site allocation policy, which sets out that the redevelopment of the site should only be permitted if the existing business relocates within the Bristol area. The relocation of the existing business to Yate accords with this element of the site allocation policy and is acceptable. The inclusion of 190 square metres of flexible commercial floor space is shown indicatively on the corner of Goodneskin Road and Filwood Road, so that's the orange element of the site at the top. It should be noted that the Council's urban design team have objected to the amount of employment floor space, wishing for a higher amount to deliver a more mixed-use scheme. And these concerns are recognised, however, officers are satisfied that the amount and type of commercial floor space is sufficient to satisfy emergent policy. I think at this stage I can just sort of clarify an issue that was raised in some of the public forum statements around the nature of that employment floor space. So the planning permission would be for flexible Class E, which can cover a range of different commercial uses apart from retail. It could be restricted further, so it would only be occupied by a Class EE use, which would be healthcare. So if members do feel that they want to proceed with that, that could be possible. But I would say it's probably the advice of officers that isn't sought, because 190 square metres is probably a bit too small for the NHS to take on that building. We have had discussions with the NHS prior to this application being submitted and as part of the Atlas Place process, and the NHS did confirm that they would be looking for a building of approximately 500 square metres at a minimum within the site, within the Atlas Place area for their purposes. So the 190 square metres probably, if it was restricted to healthcare only, would probably result in a building that would probably be unviable for the NHS. We have had wider discussions with the other two sites, however, and it's likely that one of those sites would deliver that healthcare facility within their application when it's submitted. So on that basis, officers are satisfied that this site doesn't need to include any healthcare facilities. So the demolition of the existing buildings is largely acceptable. However, the Council's urban design team have also objected to the demolition of the existing building on Filwood Road. So that's the building shown on screen at the moment. This building is of architectural merit and it does have character, and therefore the Council's design team would like to see it retained and incorporated into the development. We did ask the applicant to consider this, however they did provide justification for why it wouldn't be possible, and officers have considered that justification and are satisfied with the information provided. The building ultimately isn't listed, it's not located in the conservation area, and there was subsequently no protection from demolition. In fact, a permitted development application for the demolition of the building was recently approved by the Council, meaning that all buildings could be demolished without the need for plan permission, even if this application was approved. It is therefore the view of officers that it would not be reasonable to refuse the application due to the demolition of the existing buildings, although it is acknowledged that the demolition of some of these existing buildings, particularly on Filwood Road, is regrettable. In terms of access, the application proposes a number of key principles and design elements which will be secured and approved at this stage. The plans on screen are submitted as key documents. On the left is, it shows that there will be 2 vehicle access points to into the site. However, there will be no through route, which will restrict rat running and promote more sustainable travel options. In green, there will also be an uninterrupted cycling route through the site, which will align with and accord with wider cycling and planned infrastructure and routes within the wider area. A further pedestrian access route is proposed from the north, and a condition is attached to secure passive protection for future and pedestrian cycle connection to Mendip View Avenue to the south. New dedicated cycling infrastructure is proposed along Goodneskin Road and Fulwood Road, which will link up with wider planned cycling infrastructure in Fish Ponds. And all of these improvements have been agreed with input from the Council's Transport Development Management team. All other issues have been carefully considered by officers with input from consultees, and for the reasons set out in the report, is considered acceptable subject to conditions. The applicant has agreed to a Section 106 agreement securing 22% affordable housing, which is acceptable and policy compliant given viability information submitted. The applicant has also agreed to various financial contributions for the upgrade of existing highway infrastructure in the local area, as well as improvements to bus infrastructure, fire hydrants and off-site tree replacements if necessary. So overall, officers are satisfied that the development is policy compliant. It will deliver clear benefits to the local area. It will respond to the emerging context and has been progressed in accordance with the draft Vision Framework report, and will help up to enable the progression of a more comprehensive and coordinated form of development with other sites in the locality. The development is also in accordance with the adopted site policy, which should hold significant weight in the decision making. As such, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions and obligations set out in the report and shown on screen. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for persevering after the initial technical glitch. So, can I just ask a question before we come to the rest of the committee? I've seen your hands. Can you just talk through? This is coming as an outline, and so if a reserved matters application comes back in, will that come to this committee, or is that just up to a decision later on?
It is up for decision later on. It probably would, I would say, highly likely. It would certainly be taken to agenda for members to take a view on that.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that before we started. Okay, who's got something that they want to clarify or ask? Oh, everyone. Okay, I'll start over this side. We'll go with Zoe, Sarah, and then we'll come over this side. Sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, what's the scope of the Class EE being reserved for health services? So can that include things like opticians, dentists, pharmacies, or is it just GPs?
Jonathan's got it on the screen, so what's it?
Yeah, so in terms of Class EE, in the use class order, that would cover medical services not attached to the residence of the practitioner.
So if the NHS aren't willing to put, say, a GP surgery in that flexible space, we could have, say, a pharmacy or an optician's or a dentist, which we're obviously very much lacking these days.
Of course, the alternative, and I believe this is what's been recommended, is a more kind of broader Class E, which I would imagine kind of would cover alternative uses.
So I can see in the papers that would be like shops or gyms and stuff like that, which are also obviously very useful, but one of the concerns was that it would put strain on the local infrastructure for healthcare. So if we can lessen that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, like I said, if members do feel that they want to restrict that use to Class EE only, then that can be done by condition. I think it was the view of officers that trying to keep that use as broad as possible would be the best way to try and to secure an actual end user for it. It might be the case that if we restrict it too tightly to use Class EE, it might be that the NHS can't take that building on, so there'll have to be a subsequent application to change that use. But ultimately, it can be done if that's what members want to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sarah, do you want to go next?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, on the slide under the sort of access and the sort of transport around the site, it seems that along the sort of that one edge, there's it's marked as shared footway cycleway. Is that intended to be literally just a pavement that anyone, bikes or pedestrians can use, or is that something for sort of reserved matters, to be detailed in reserved matters?
No, well, so Goodneskin Road and Fulwood Road, we have secured plans for the transformation of those roads. It would be dedicated footway and a separate segregated cycle route. In the future, these plans might change as the other developments come forward and a more comprehensive transformation of the roads is secured. But for the purpose of this application, those roads will be developed, and in the future, the Council's Transport Development and Team are satisfied that they can be adequately transformed in the future to a new design if those the wider transport scheme is developed for the wider area.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just always concerned about a sort of mixed-use space, that it's kind of the worst of all worlds as both a cyclist and a pedestrian.
No, they would be
some
separated.
separation there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm going to do a horseshoe sort of like. So who's the next person on this side? Is it Serena and then Richard? Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to know if the worst case scenario, what would happen if the other sites weren't developed in the Atlas Place framework? I mean, how confident are we that those will be delivered, those other two, to make the whole, and then the wider Fish Ponds area as well? Because a lot seems to be contingent on this being successful on the other sites coming forward. That is a question. I'm not sure if I'm right. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I think in the report it would be useful to have that wider context as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say the other two developers have invested a lot of resource and money into their proposals so far. There's nothing to indicate that they aren't committed to their developments. Obviously, we have no way to control that. We can't force them to submit a planning application. But based on conversations so far, the council is quite happy that those schemes will come forward at some point in the near future.
Okay. Oh, do you want to come back, Serena, quickly?
Yeah, I would. When we say near future, are we confident that will be next year?
That's what we've been told. Again, we have no way to control that, but that's information we've been provided.
Because I was up there this morning having a look around, and I think it's a fantastic site. But obviously, if the other sites aren't developed, the new residents are in a somewhat difficult position where they're living surrounded by HGVs and those sort of issues. So just a thought.
Okay, Richard.
Tom, my question is linked to what Serena was saying there, but hopefully I'm a bit more positive or optimistic perhaps. Obviously there are two other sites and we've received, but we haven't assessed master plan. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's called a vision document, but essentially it is a master plan.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it seems from what the public and councillors have said in public forum, that graphic packaging have been very positive, and I know the scheme has been around for a lot longer than the other two, of course. So I can understand why this lower density scheme should be determined. By the time a full application is received, if we are minded to support it, is it likely, in your view, the vision document or master plan will be approved?
I would like to think so. That the applicant would have 2 years to submit reserved matters submission following the approval of the outline. So officers would like to think that within 2 years the vision document would be finalised. Again, the information we've been told by the developers that it's very close to being finalised. So again, hopefully at some point next year it'll be submitted and we can get it formally recognised.
Thank you. Al, go ahead. Yeah.
Sweet. So under section 106, it states that they are designing and delivering improvements to the junction of Hockey's Lane, Fish Ponds Road, Station Avenue South, and Channons Hill for £186,000. So what improvements would these be, for example?
So for that, it's a proportionate amount that has been agreed with the council's transport team, and it's envisaged that the other developers would also contribute money towards those improvements. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact transformation proposed to that junction, but it would be along the lines of improving pedestrian crossings and improving the width of roads and the sight lines and things like that. But it would be secured by condition as well, and the Council's Transport Development Management Team would have input into those designs.
Sweet, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Katya, go on.
Hi, I do appreciate that this particular plan doesn't have all the answers to the transport issues around that particular area, specifically to do with cycling and possibly buses, but I'm going to talk about cycling because I cycle around that area quite a lot. I just wanted to know if there was a broader plan together with all the others of trying to improve the cycling in that area, because other than the Bristol to Bath cycle path, which is utterly amazing, the rest of it's completely pants. It's filled with parked cars, aggressive drivers. You have to go over a bridge when you're on a bicycle, which is really narrow, because there's no access. The Bristol to cycle path in that particular part has access by Morrison's and right there, and then as you get a little bit further up, there's no access. You can't get on and off it, basically. So I was wondering if there was any sort of formal plans on a long-term basis, together with some of the money with GPI. I appreciate that that's not their entire problem, but they have to contribute towards it, of creating better cycle paths around the whole area, not just on the Bristol to Bath cycle path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, the answer is yes to that, essentially. I think as part of this application, Fulwood Road and Goodneskin Road will have dedicated cycling infrastructure installed on them.
That cannot be parked on?
No, there won't be any car parking along that road. The other sites around the site are a bit more difficult because there is already residential parking there. But as the wider schemes progress, a more comprehensive schedule of drawings for wider transport improvements will be delivered, hopefully as part of the master plan. Again, that's what we've been told, that they are being prepared.
Yeah.
The Bristol to Bath Railway Path, again, there will be additional connections, cycling connections to that from the other sites. They do sit outside the application site that we're considering at the moment. But in terms of wider aspirations, that has been considered by the Council's transport team and planning team.
Because Fulwood Road is one that's parked up full all the time, and I can't see you taking away parking from those residents. That's the thing. And Forest Road, which is just above it, is a nightmare to drive. I don't cycle down there; too many cars, and it's a tiny little road which is also accessed. Sometimes you have to access through to get to there through Forest Road.
Yeah,
I mean, it's in that little corner is a real car Mageddon.
So the dedicated cycle route on Fulwood Road won't be taking up any existing residential parking spaces. On the north side, they will be remaining, and that will be part of the Fulwood House, House
it's
site.
usually car parking that causes the bicycles to keep having to go into the roads in front of the cars, and I have to tell you, Fish Ponds drivers are not patient.
Okay. Okay, Al, do you want to ask one?
That's sweet. I've been told that there's been increased crime on the cycle path. Will any of this funding be put towards like cameras on that cycle path, or go towards more policing up and down that cycle path, or street lights even on that cycle path?
Not as part of this application. This application isn't sited directly adjacent to the cycle path. I think when the other two sites do come forward, we would look at the security of the cycle path, and as part of those applications, increased security measures could be considered for those proposals.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, and I'll come to you. I'll come to you both in a second, but I've got a couple that I'd like to ask. I know that in the site allocations, it's 208 homes, and then obviously this is up to 252 homes. Is there a reason for that discrepancy? And I assume that we can't pin down exactly how many homes it is in outline. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the outline is for up to 252 homes, so it won't be able to exceed that. It might be that subject to design considerations and issues when it comes to reserved matters, it might be slightly less than that, but the application is for up to 252 houses. The site allocation is just a general guide on what the policymakers thought the site could accommodate. That was about 10 years ago now, so since then further issues have progressed, particularly regarding the housing crisis, and it's envisaged that this site can actually accommodate higher density than was outlined in the site allocation policy.
Thanks. And the other question is around, we've got a car club bay, but as I understand it, only one car club bay conditioned for 252 homes. I was just wondering how you work out how many of those to put in. Is that a set thing, the outline, or is that, again, another reserved matter that can we stipulate more car club spaces? Because it seems like for 250 homes in an area like this, it's not really in a urban area, it's slightly out of the centre. That might be a good option for a lot of people, particularly with some of the stuff, the incentives that are given when they move in. So is there scope for any more car club spaces?
It would have to be discussed with the developer. It's ultimately the car club requirement is the policy compliant. So I think anything above that, it might be difficult to secure, but we can look at exploring that as part of the condition, the car club condition that is attached to the permission.
Okay, thanks. And then I think the other issue that everyone's aware of is the health infrastructure and how we put a condition if we want to on that, because I don't know what members here think, but we might need to decide whether we want to make that a condition that it is. It sounds like we can prioritise that some of the Class E is.
Yeah, so there is already a condition on restricting it, the Class E, so it can't be retail use.
Yeah.
So that condition could be amended so it restricts it even further. So it's only Class EE. So it's condition 49. That could be amended further.
So can members just be thinking to themselves what you think about that? Because I think we should make a decision about that here. I think it makes sense at the outline stage to give a steer on that. I did have two other hands over here. Do you want to make your questions? Was it Guy and then Ellie, was it? I don't know. Ellie, then Guy.
I've been trying to work out what I actually want to ask. There's obviously some concern about, we've talked about transport, we've talked about health, but there's obviously some concern about sort of further infrastructure impact of this development site. And I know that this isn't a material consideration and that this is only one small part of it. Are you confident that the master plan will kind of address that, and through things like SIL and S106 will be able to mitigate some of the impact of this new population, which is part of a much bigger regeneration plan as well? I think this feels like just the beginning for this area of a huge amount of change, and I've had that in my area, so I know what it's like and the concerns that come through. So if there's anything you can kind of reassure people around that, would be really helpful.
Well, we have been working with the developers for 2 to 3 years now on the master plan. The officers are heavily invested in ensuring that master plan does resolve those issues or address them as far as we can. Regarding SIL and Section 106, again, this application does secure proportionate Section 106 contributions, and it would be required that the other two developers also provide contributions for off-site improvements to mitigate any harmful impact, not just by their proposed development, but the wider impact of all 3 sites cumulatively. And they are preparing also cumulative studies regarding transport impacts and wider issues associated with those developments. So I think that the officers are satisfied that sufficient work has been progressed to look at things comprehensively.
Okay, Guy. Guy first, sorry, yeah, and then you two. Yeah.
Thank you. My question, to be honest, was along similar lines. I suppose it's given the proximity of the three sites, 515, 516 and 517. There's the 3 bits of the site allocations that are within this sort of area. Is there a risk that, as you're ruling out options depending on the sequence that developments come forward, is there a risk that the first application limits the viability of the remaining 2 sites and the further one limits further the viability of the third? In other words, is there a risk that we rule out options for one of the sites based on the decisions we make about the earlier sites? And appreciating this is an outline planning application, do you feel there's enough flexibility in that to deal with any issues coming out of the sort of needs of the sites cumulatively?
Yes, that concern is acknowledged, and we've had discussions with both adjoining landowners and also internally between officers about how we can reduce that risk. Ultimately, there is always going to be a slight risk when we've got 3 separate sites, 3 separate landowners working at separate timeframes. What we've had to do as part of this application is to ensure that we are approving something that won't prejudice those future sites coming forward and will enable a more comprehensive development to be pursued, and subject to the plan submitted and the Section 106 obligations secured, we are satisfied that that would be the case. I think it's fair to say that we wouldn't be approving the application if we thought it would jeopardise the future development of either of those adjoining sites.
Okay, Cartier then Al.
I was just there's something weird on page 49. It said here something about it. The nearest nature proposed development is the Eastern Staple Hill disused railway site of natural conservation interest. It's 0.2 kilometres north of the site. Is the railway path not considered a nature corridor? And why not?
I would assume it would have a separate designation to that.
I think it's technically a park, weirdly.
Because it kind of should be included in that, because I can tell you, cycling there at 8 o'clock at night in the dark, you see a lot of wildlife. And I'm not talking people. There's
I think
nobody
that's
there.
outside the scope of what we can classify or unclassify.
Honestly, the amount of foxes that even sit there and stare at you when you cycle past.
Indeed. Al.
I just wanted to ask about the energy efficiency, the energy efficiency of the society, and if it includes the use of heat pumps, and if it adheres to the Bristol 2030 one city plan.
So the application has been assessed by the Council Sustainability team, and it does meet the Council Sustainability policies. It's not possible at this stage to fully confirm the measures that would be used, as the detailed design of the properties hasn't been developed yet.
Okay.
But it is likely that it would involve some form of renewable, so air source heat pumps and or solar panels, and conditions are attached to secure those details if relevant.
Sweet, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, should we have 2 more questions and then we need to move on to the debate?
Just a quick one. As I said, I was up there this morning having a look around, and I thought I'll just nip back into the city centre by bus. There is a point to what I'm saying. Yes, I thank you for that. Yeah, big mistake. I got to the bus stop and it was going to be a 35-minute wait for number 6, and there was no other option whatsoever. And I went into the sandwich shop. I promise you this story is relevant. The lady at the sandwich shop said they never turn up anyway. So my question is about the Section 106 contribution towards fish ponds feasibility studies, what that actually means. My main reservation, I think, about this application is the lack of access, to public transport. So how does this development overcome that? And is that through the contribution to the fish ponds feasibility study? Sorry, long question.
It's hoped that with regards to buses, there is the fish ponds feasibility study. Also, the bus infrastructure contribution would secure money for that as well. So it's hoped that those 2 would secure improvements to existing bus services and facilities in the local area. Also, the transformation of the highway surrounding the site as well. It's hoped that would enable a modal shift towards more sustainable modes of travel anyway, so fewer people would actually need to rely on the public transport in itself.
Okay. Guy, and then I'm going to ask one, then we'll move on to the debate.
Thank you. It was just around, this is a really minor point, but it was just around the wording of condition 43 around car club, which I saw had been updated in the amendment sheet to reflect the council's normal wording. It looks like a very unusually worded condition to me, or at least the amended one was, and I just wanted to check where that wording had come from, if that's the normal wording, rather than a previous draft. The wording in the papers looked absolutely fine to me. The new wording looks atypical, and I was just wondering where it had come from and whether that was a very sort of hard and fast thing that you definitely wanted to change, or whether maybe something a little broader might be more helpful moving forwards.
So the initial wording of that condition was drafted by the applicant. However, the Council's Transport Development Management team did review that and weren't satisfied that it secured the level of detail required. So the amended wording in the amendment sheet came from the Council's Transport Development Management team as per their standard requirements.
Is that okay, Guy?
Can I just check, has the applicant expressed a view on that condition?
Sorry?
Has the applicant expressed a view on the new condition?
They've accepted all, all the conditions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, you wanted to say something, didn't you, Zoe? Okay, go on. Oh, debate. Okay, fine. We'll come to that in a second. I want to say one last question, just around, this question of health infrastructure and not, if you see what I mean. You have said in the papers that it takes something out of affordable housing if we decide to do something. Could you unpack that a little bit? What changes does that make?
So the way that local planning policy is written, and not only in Bristol but right across the country, is that the only policy in our local plan, as far as obligations are concerned, that can flex is affordable housing. So our affordable housing policy will say something along the lines of all schemes above 15 units to deliver 30% affordable housing subject to scheme viability. So any other obligations that are required, you add those in, and in effect that impacts on the amount of affordable housing. So if you added in a contribution of £400,000 towards whatever else it happens to be, health infrastructure, etc., that then goes in as a definite, and the amount of affordable housing comes down accordingly. Because that's the only policy that is able to flex. It's designed to flex like that, to take into account of other things. So, anything we ask for comes at the expense of affordable housing on a scheme that is not fully viable.
So if we put in a condition around health and make it more strict about which bits, that effectively will mean that there's less affordable housing in there?
No.
No?
No, because what the ICB have asked for is a contribution for off-site provision of something. What we're talking about here is conditioning that the on-site unit be made available for health uses if they want.
Got you.
So it's two slightly different things. So conditioning,
I see what you're saying now.
The commercial unit wouldn't impact on the viability, no.
Does everyone understand that? Yeah? Okay, good. Rich, should we move on to the debate? Or have you, okay, go on, and then we'll come to you.
Thanks, Chairman. Members may realise it's a rare as hen's teeth to actually receive an application like this for demolition and quite significant regeneration and not receive a baying public area of opposition. Instead, we've had today the Fish Ponds Planning Group, and we've had local councillors commenting how constructive and positive their engagement's been with the applicant, graphic packaging, and to me, that says something. I mean, and I know that actually we get here the quality of application where people are very unhappy with the process, the lack of contact and the lack of change. But here we have a scheme, and can I remind people that in the recent months we've approved actually schemes for up to developments of up to 20 stories. We have actually graphic packaging not being greedy. They came forward with a positive, in my view, scheme for the 2-storey residential development, which allows for 22% affordable housing and actually significant improvements to local sustainable transport. And it does seem to me this is 100% good news story. If one knows anything, and I've heard quite a bit about the 2 other schemes, they're proposing significantly higher density and that's going to have an impact on street size, overlooking, transport, etc., certainly the health angles. And I have to say that I'm getting a bit irritated by the health sector because they may not believe so, but up to local government and other services, public, very well funded. They just haven't got their act in gear, in my view. And increasingly, they're coming to us and seeking to blackmail the planning authority to seek to offload funding onto actually applicants. Well, if we do go that route, then we'll imperil the sorts of benefits we can get from schemes. And in my view, this is an ideal scheme for local people. The applicants not being greedy. In my view, their architects designed a very well designed, low intensity scheme, which fits in that community. So, in my view, this is a scheme which deserves support. Finally, could I say, I'm not happy with the notion of penalising a responsible applicant by actually restricting that healthy E classification. We already know the health service is unlikely to need it. And it seems more appropriate if the other applicants on the other two sites are pushing for higher density, then we should look at that, but not at this low intensity scheme. So I'll be supporting the scheme, Chairman, with passion.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Zoe.
I would just like to thank the applicants for the amount of care and thought that they've put into this. I can see, how much they've liaised with, the local community groups as well as local councillors with pledges to, support bus infrastructure as well as, employment skills plan. I think it's a really incredible thing to see an applicant who has put so much thought and care into their application. I more or less agree with Richard Eddy. However, I differ when it comes to the healthcare side of things. I think, we have an incredibly strained healthcare system at the moment. People in general are finding it very difficult to get healthcare appointments. I think as much as I will always support more housing, we also need to understand that more housing means more strain on existing infrastructure. And so whatever we can do to lessen that burden is always important. And so I would move for a condition or a restriction so that the Class E becomes a Class EE. Okay. Otherwise, I'll be supporting this regardless.
Thank you. Any other comments on that or anything else? Should we go for Serena, then Cartier, then Guy, and then Sarah?
I think this is a good application and I'm very supportive of it. It's a great site and it does have some issues, as we've discussed, in terms of accessibility by bus. But in general, I really appreciate the applicant's passion and commitment to the local community. I think it's very laudable and you're so integrated with that community and you've really understood it. And it's fantastic to see some genuine engagement going on there. I also very much appreciate that these are family homes, which are badly needed. It's also a case of if not here, where? I mean, this is a pretty ideal site, despite some issues, as I said, with accessibility. So yes, I'd like to thank the applicant. I'm going to be an optimist. Councillor Eddy would be delighted to know, and hope very much that the other sites will come forward and we'll have a very coherent type of vision for the rest of this community, which is what it will be, a new community. I think it's very exciting. Thank you.
Thanks, Rena. Cartier.
I very much think the same as the other councillors. I think this has been a wonderful project that's come forward. It's obviously been well thought out, spoken to the local people. I appreciate the fact that it's a lower density, considering the most area around there is quite low density. It's not a high density area in terms of city centre. I would prefer the EE classification for the healthcare, but I feel that the applicant is ready to do that anyway. But we probably need another GP practice, because I have had messages from the local GP practice, which is not far away from there, by the way. It's Beechwood Road and Fish Ponds Clinic. Their one GP practice have actually sent us to say they're going on a go slow or a working to rule or something, because they're so overwhelmed, they've got too much illness. So that is something that has to be taken into consideration when we're increasing the number of people there. And also we need other services to do with health, not just better GPs, which we need as well. Dentists. We've lost a lot of pharmacies in the local area in the last few years. My biggest concern with this one is transport, because, as I said before, that particular little area is all these narrow roads with loads of cars on them, loads of parking. The years I've lived there, the amount of increase in cars and decrease in bus service, definite decrease in bus service over those years. I've seen children grow up, they can't move anywhere else because they don't have a home, and they can't rely on the bus services. I can tell with my own son at the moment, can't rely on the bus services to get a job, so the families go from 2 cars to 3 cars. That's happened quite a lot in our area. So that's something, and I appreciate that they are putting some money towards a transport scheme there that has to be looked at, definitely, including the bridge on the over the M4, which pertains to this, because that's often where people work in Yate or go to school if they go to Winterbourne, and now they have to go all the way around because the bridge has been closed for years. So that does affect this, and the buses don't go that way anymore either. And there's a big shopping area in Yate as well. So there has to be a lot of work done on transport around that area. That's all I have to say. But I will be voting for this.
Thank you, Karchi. I don't remember who's next. So I think, was it Sarah and then Guy and then Al? Oh, sorry, Guy, then Al, then. Okay, right, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. No, just to say, I think some of us were at a briefing by the applicant some while ago now, possibly not all of us. I have to admit, I was slightly unnerved when someone said, could you sub on to this one today, just because my recollection of that briefing was that I might be dangerously close to being predetermined to refuse. And then I actually read the application as written, and I have to admit, my hat goes off to the officer and the applicant for the work that they've done in this case. It's one of the most thorough, detailed reports I've ever seen. And what a nightmarish logistical exercise to have to kind of sequence and work through and deal with. So phenomenal piece of work that we've got in front of us. In respect of the sort of remaining concern that I have, and it sort of reflects Councillor Francis's public forum, was just around, some of you will know I used to be councillor for Lochleys, which has within it the wonderful junction 2 of the M32, which was one of those wonderful areas where each individual bit of the development around junction 2, the addition of the IKEA, the addition of the major secondary school, the addition of the industrial estate, and then the giant Tesco, each one of which wouldn't have utterly decimated all transport and road use in that area, collectively did, as those things came through individually. That was my major concern. Given the strength of the report, happy to put that in the hands of the officer moving forward. I hope expertise in this is not enough to know if I think you've given yourself enough discretion to negotiate with the sort of planning for the remaining sites. But this looks like an extraordinarily good application. I'm very swayed as well by the statements that we've had from members of the local community and from the other ward councillors as well as to what a good application this is. I'm delighted to have had my mind changed so thoroughly. Thanks.
Thanks, Guy. Someone over here. Sarah.
Thank you. As my colleagues have said, this has been a really good application that has come through. It's been incredibly well thought out, and thank you so much to the applicant for clearly putting a lot of thought and also a lot of engagement with the community and that kind of real communication with those affected by this. I've joked a few times that in this committee we don't get the easy cases because obviously they all go to delegated authority, and I think this is probably as close to an easy one as we're going to get. It was very nice to hear some supportive statements as a bit of a change. As we've said, we've touched on our issues with the potential transport issues and public transport, and I really hope that going forward into more detailed plans of the sites, and especially when linking with the other two sites, the comments that we've made today are taken on board and given consideration in the applicants and officers in those sort of future communications. So I really do urge everyone to take those on board and consider especially the public transport links and buses and things like that. With regards to the Class E/Class EE, I think given that the NHS have suggested they would be less keen to take on such a small building, I would not necessarily be in favour of specifying the Class EE on this site, but I do hope the applicant kind of considers this and at least goes for a first refusal, so that the NHS can kind of consider if they do have use for that space as a first step. And then, but I think if we limit it to Class E at this stage, I think we run the risk of it then just having to come back if the NHS do or there isn't a sort of Class E use that's suitable, or that we at least look at the other two sites as being potentially space for a Class EE specification. But ultimately, I think I will be voting in favour of this application.
Thanks, sir. Al, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to thank GPI for actually listening to the community and working with the community groups. I think it's a shame that the NHS doesn't think that there's enough space for HTP. But I'm glad that GPI is happy to provide the space for dentists, pharmacies, or like opticians. They are also hugely upgrading the local area with the community infrastructure money, and so this really sets the bar for future proposals to aim for. Bristol is facing a like housing, transport, and healthcare crisis, and we need more developers like this to play their part in building responsible developments that take on local concerns and highlighted issues. I'll be voting for his application and look forward to seeing it progress over time.
Thanks, Al. Great. Ellie, go ahead.
I don't think it's very often that we all seem to be in agreement, but I think we're all in agreement. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everything that everybody said pretty much. Not going to add much more, but I would emphasise that need for a master plan. I think similar to Guy, having witnessed Bedminster Green and how the kind of succession of sites going through meant that the last one had to do a lot of mopping up, and then that's kind of now struggling to progress. I would hate to see that happen here. Obviously, you've got fewer sites, so hopefully they will be a bit more timely. But yeah, if that master plan comes through, I think that would be great.
Guy, I know you've put your hand up, but can I say something for a second and then come back to you? Is that right? I do think we need to bottom out whether we're doing this change to the condition. Is that what you're going to say? I mean, does anyone want to propose that? I mean, we can just sort of like, yeah, it sounds like there's some people who are you're for doing it.
before, Chair, if I may, just before there's a proposal, I just had a brief clarifying question that I think might help.
Right, you've gone yet?
Which is, obviously, we not time for asking officers questions, but nod or shake head to let me know. EE to E or E to EE is either a minor variation, or would it, in other words, if later down the line you wanted to go from EE back to E or from E to E, well, you couldn't go from E to EE. Does that make sense?
If we were restricting it via condition, then it would require planning permission to change to another use class, even in Class E.
Okay. Were you going to put something forward? Suggest that you
I would like to propose that we...
constrain it to the health aspect?
Yeah. I'll second.
You'll second that? Okay. So, I mean, we don't usually take a vote on particular conditions, I don't think, do we? Or can we?
Yes.
Okay.
We do, yeah.
All right. I mean, I'm happy to just go with that. Is everyone clear what we're voting on and what we're not voting on? Guy, you've got your hand up.
Apologies, Chair, but just in terms of the protocol, if a motion's been proposed or seconded, it would be good to give people an opportunity to speak or
okay.
against it before we vote.
We did just talk about that for a while, didn't we? To be fair.
On the condition, right? I didn't refer to this earlier because I was thinking it was going to be teased out, which it has, great. As I understand it, if we vote for this condition, the Class E is then Class E, whatever it is, there's no guarantee that the NHS will want to take this space on because it's too small. And I think it's time... Sorry?
But another health service.
Yeah, but the main concern is GP, isn't it? GP surgery here. Yeah, is that tying the hands then of the applicant, and how would it affect the rest of the development? That's what's concerning me.
Can anyone answer that? Or give an interpretation of that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's just of assistance, potentially an option could be to condition for a limited period of time the space to be for Class E purposes only, which would allow it to be sort of marketed for those specific uses, and then kind of if there is no interest in after that period of time, it could then revert back to the condition as set out in the papers, which would be for general Class E use, excluding EA. So that is potentially an option that be considered. So that would exclude retail.
As a proposer, are you happy with that, Zoe?
I think that Jonathan's advice or added information there is incredible. I think that changes the whole board game because it allows us to put that condition in. But if it doesn't bring anything to fruition because the NHS don't want it, then we're not going to have to go through planning permission again.
Okay.
So I think, I go with Jonathan's suggestion.
Okay.
100% happy with that.
Jeremy's just reminded me that process-wise, we should go for the actual moving of the motion for the entire application first and then amend it by the condition as we're doing that.
My apologies.
Which I didn't realise. So we'll I think if that's okay with members, we'll go to the vote on the recommendation. So to test if that's what the committee wants to do. I will propose that we go with the officer's recommendation to approve this application.
Seconded.
Oh, you got in there first.
All right. Okay, Richard said it. Okay, yes, we'll go Richard seconding it. So I have actually got a random generator to go round a bit more randomly today because we have had, it's been noted that I keep going like that. So we'll go in this order. Pulteney, Hornshan, Ralston Classic, Almagrabi, Eddie, Breyer, Freeman, Pete. So just say if you're in favour of, if you're for going with the officer recommendation, say for. If you're against it, say against. Sorry? Right, it's relatively randomly. So I'll just go to each person. Councillor Pulteney.
For.
Councillor Hornshan. Oh, we're just voting for whether we agree to the officer's recommendation on the application, whether we're not going into the condition yet.
Okay. For.
Councillor Ralston.
For.
Councillor Classic.
For.
Councillor Almagrabi.
For.
Councillor Eddie.
For.
Councillor Breyer, that's me, for. Councillor Freeman.
For.
And Councillor Pete.
For.
Right, thank you. So that is approved, but we will just talk about the condition now. So you've rightly put forward a suggestion, Zoe, that's been seconded by Al, but also the information that Jonathan shared. Are we happy to vote on that now? I will go with the same order because I'm not going to do the random generator again. So just to ensure that the committee is given a view on that. Yeah. So what Jonathan said?
Yes, yeah.
Right. So if you're in favour of what Jonathan said, so to basically put a condition in that markets it as health provision to start with, and then if that's not conducive to anything coming forward, then it reverts back. Do you understand that? Any questions?
If I can just say, it would be helpful just to understand the length of the period of time that members would like to see for that. I was also just going to make some general comments as well, just around, obviously, we need to ensure that sort of the committee's of the view that this is both reasonable and necessary as well. So I know there have been some comments made in the debate about that, but yeah, I think that's the only other...
Would 6 months be reasonable?
I was going to say 2 years.
Oh, well, that's a long time. That could stick.
Is it possible for us to
scheme?
Move this and then we just rely on the officers to come up with the most appropriate wording for the condition? That's basically giving them the general idea here, and then they can go away and work out how long it should be marketed for. Guy, you've got your hand up. Go on, quick.
It was to suggest just that, Chair, that we've given officers a steer. The reasons it's necessary, reasonable and proportionate have been discussed, and I'm sure will be in the minutes. I'm more than happy to delegate to officers the technical side of this. There was another issue that I was going to raise earlier in respect of this, but that would be if, for example, one of the other sites nearby were to come forward that had a much more suitable building for medical provision, you wouldn't then want this developer to have to completely redo their planning consent when you had a perfectly viable option right there, and the only obstacle to delivering it was that we had sort of forced this condition upon this applicant at this point. I think Johnny's condition gets us out of it quite elegantly, actually, but I'd want to make sure that officers have the broadest, again, possible discretion in making sure that what's implemented, what ends up on the books, is necessary, reasonable and proportionate. Okay. I am also, apologies, but slightly worried about this sequencing. It does strike me that we're about to amend a motion that we've just passed, which I don't think is how the sequencing is supposed to work, but taking the initial as an indicative vote, let's get this amendment through, and then, but I would strongly advise we take a final vote on the motion as amended.
Okay, I mean, that's another 2 votes. Let's go quickly round then. Okay, so let's talk about this condition, whether we're happy with it or not. I'm going to use the same order. Oh no, I can actually change it. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to just go round. Councillor Hornshan.
4.
Councillor Pete.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Freeman.
4.
Councillor Poultney.
4.
Councillor Elmagrabi.
4.
Councillor Ralston.
4.
Councillor Breyer, that's me. 4. Councillor Classic.
4.
Okay, so that condition amendment, or what do we call it, has carried. And just for the sake of Guy's sanity, let's go round and do it again, just for the whole motion.
Chair, can I then propose the motion as amended?
Thank you. I'll second. Thank you. I've got a new order. Councillor Hornshan.
4.
Councillor Breyer, that's me. I'm 4. Councillor Pete.
4.
Councillor Poultney.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
Almost given up the will to live, but 4.
Thank you. Councillor Ralston.
4.
Councillor Classic.
4.
Councillor Elmagrabi.
4.
Councillor Freeman.
4.
Okay, let's just take that as a lesson in all being in favour of something 3 times. Okay, thank you. So I think that's the end of that item. That has obviously been approved. And I think we'll just take a 5-minute comfort break and come back at about 36 minutes past 3. Sorry, that got too complicated. We'll move straight to the public forum. First statement is B1 from Nigel Morris. Is Nigel here? Yeah, please go ahead.
Is it? Can you? Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, can hear you.
I urge the committee to reject this application for the following reason, because the changes will not be to support the future viability of the building to be run as a pub in future, and the high density of the proposed accommodation immediately adjacent to the premises will not be ideal for running a pub. The loss of the outdoor space and the lowering of the wall, limited parking spaces will reduce the future viability of the old tavern being returned a pub again, and it will also severely limit a return back to a live music venue in the future. Although on the plus side, the improved number of people living in the area is going to help the viability of the pub. Also, the changes will impact the appearance of the area surrounding the listed building, and consequently probably the original intent of listing the building and maintaining its current appearance. And the changes will also increase traffic and parking problems in the area, which will also be an adverse effect for local residents.
Thank you, Nigel. I understand you're also speaking to the next statement, are you? B2, Cameras Bristol Pubs Group. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Thank you.
Chris couldn't be here, so I offer to read his out, although it's probably longer than a minute, but I'll be as fast as I can. We urge the committee to similarly reject the current application for the listed building consent, as the proposed changes are specific to a proposal to develop the site as student accommodation, which would not be required if it was to be retained as a public house. Indeed, such alterations are incompatible with such a use and would likely damage potential viability. Even though the University of West of England has paused its plans to relocate the campus, they've made it clear it's only a temporary delay, so the need for more student accommodation looks like it's not going to be needed after all. Also to say that we're aware that at least one local experienced independent pub operator who is keen to take on the old tavern believes that it can be a viable venue, and we understand that an approach has been made to the owners. Much is likely to depend on the outcome of this application. So the old tavern still has potential viability for future local community, and we'd like to try and help secure that. Briefly, Chris wants to point out that it's 800 metres, not the number of minutes walked. And so we were happy that the previous applications were refused, and Camera will do its best to support the City Council if there comes to any appeal, because we've had a degree of expertise and success in the past on this aspect. So I think that's just about it.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you very much. So that concludes the public forum. So I'm just going to pass over to Amy for the presentation from the officers.
Okay, good afternoon. So this is the listed building application for the Old Tavern. So I'm sure you'll remember on the 23rd of October we took the full planning application for the Old Tavern. The listed building application is slightly different from the full planning application. I'll set out exactly what that comprises of and what we can assess today in this presentation. It was decided at that meeting that this application should come back before committee. There was a site notice and neighbour letters done for both the listed building and the full planning application combined, and collectively for the two applications we did have 48 objections and a councillor referral, but the majority of objections were in relation to full planning application matters such as the student concentrations, transport and movement issues and the loss of the public house, which have already been assessed. We have actually had two amenity group objections specifically relating to the listed building application, and that includes a recent objection from Living Eastern Heritage and Environmental Group. Their objections relate to the alterations to the stone wall, which I'll cover off later in this presentation. and the demolition of some of the outcrop elements to the public house. Again, I'll cover that off separately. They do also talk about the pub losing its character and sort of the layout and the footprint of the pub and what makes it a pub. But actually, we find that it wasn't actually originally built as a pub. It was built as a house, I think, what we've got here. It was described as a house in 1839. So I can kind of explain that to you a little bit further, but it's not your traditional pub footprint or layout per se. What actually kind of identifies the building as the pub is the totem on the corner, and that would be retained as part of the proposals. So I just wanted to cover off that point because I don't really cover that off anywhere else in the presentation. But generally speaking, the amenity groups were concerned that the proposals would harm the listed building and its setting. So the works that we can consider today under the listed building application include the demolition works, internal works, works to the stone wall, so that includes its refurbishment, it being lowered around sections of the site and extended in other areas, external works, and there's new extensions to the ancillary buildings along Small Lane. I'll set out exactly the section that comprises of. It doesn't relate to the detached block that is not attached to the listed building, and if it were to be constructed, that would require full planning consent, but it wouldn't become a listed building once it's constructed if it were to be constructed. Neither would it be listed by curtilage as confirmed by our conservation officer because it's detached. But yeah, the element that is attached would be listed by curtilage, so it is actually up for consideration here, and I'll set that out. Okay, so this is just very simply, in terms of the site constraints that are applicable to the listed building application, it's Grade 2 listed and it's in the Stapleton and Frome Valley Conservation Area. The conservation area is highlighted in green and the listed building itself is highlighted in purple, and surrounding listed buildings are also highlighted in purple. Demolition works. So, is that screen working? Yeah, okay, great. So a lot of the demolition works, you can see there's a building here attached to the side, fronting onto Blackberry Hill, that would be demolished, as with this attached building fronting onto Small Lane, and centrally there's a number of outriggers that would be lost. This also would be lost, which is the sort of fire escape, and this just shows the first floor at the top here, so it's actually largely internal on the first floor, and then again it highlights the fire escape. So slightly clearer, this would be lost, this building here. This building here is lost, and these central outriggers here are lost. The conservation officer has looked at these. These are 19th, 20th century additions. They are not considered to be, they're actually found to, I think, was it obscure? They obscure the site's significance, is what the conservation officer said, and are proposed for removal, and they're later extensions, so there's no objection or any harm found from those being demolished. Okay, so internally, what's quite interesting with this application is listed building applications have a listed description, and as part of the listed description, it sets out in the listing description that the interior of the building wasn't inspected. So when the building was listed, they didn't actually go inside the building. So obviously that's not really what was found to be of merit here. That being said, that isn't to say that there aren't elements inside that are of merit and importance, and the conservation officer and myself have been inside the listed building itself. What is obvious now is that the building is in quite a poor condition. There's damaged roofs, it's resulted in water ingress, and there's been some vandalism, and there have been squatters within the building. It is in need of repair, and that's all confirmed within a condition survey that was submitted with the application. But what we find is that actually sort of internal plan form has already been sort of altered quite heavily. So plan form is kind of the footprint, like the layout inside, to such a point whereby we don't find any of the changes proposed internally, such as removal of partitions, would result in any harm to the listed building itself. So yeah, we find the internal work acceptable, and the conservation officer has confirmed that there's no harm there. Works to the stone wall, I probably could have done a slightly better visual there, but this does show that, again, the stone wall is in a poor condition, and as part of this listed building application, they would refurbish the wall. There are some sort of openings within the wall. There's vegetation growing out of it. They are having there's an opening, I might have to go back. There's an opening proposed on the Blackberry Hill frontage around here. It's not the best visual. I probably have a better one later I can show you. And they're lowering the section of wall on the junction of Blackberry Hill where it kind of intersects with Small Lane, just to 600 millimetres in height, but that wall isn't original to the building's listing, and were permission forthcoming, there would be a condition to ensure that that finish of that wall is acceptable in that location. I think the reason for lowering that wall is linked to the full planning application that's been decided, in that it actually helps with visibility for road users. As it is as existing, it's in a kind of established arrangement, so they wouldn't have to lower that wall to help with visibility. But so whilst as it is, we can't do anything about it, clearly the lowering of that wall would actually help with visibility were the full planning application allowed. But I don't really want to go too far into that, because it's just the fact that the lowering of the wall does sort of directly link to the full planning application. So that just explains why it's actually being lowered in that part. But what I should also make clear is that some works require both listed building consent and full planning consent. So where they require full planning consent as well, they will need to resubmit a full planning application. The only works proposed as part of this application that could be immediately carried out would be the internal works to the listed building, just so that that's clear. Okay, so external works. These would require both planning and listed building consent. So that includes the replacement of windows, doors, the reinstatement of the totem. At the moment, you've got, although it's in poor condition again, you've got single glazed, timber, sliding sash windows. They would look to retain the mechanism of sash, and condition is set out which requires details of those windows and the materials to ensure you get a traditional sensitive and quality finish, but there's no again objection from conservation in respect of that. Okay, so the section of the new building that does actually require both planning consent and listed building consent is this element. So this is the new detached block, which doesn't require listed building consent because it's detached. So we can essentially, for the purposes of this listed building application, it can be ignored. But this is the existing structure, which we actually believe to be one of the cottages, which was independent from the house. So it wasn't built as a pub, as I said before. This would have been one of the cottages. So the intention is to keep this section of walling as it is and extend it, and actually remove the render so that you've got the pennant stone rubble wall here and punch in the 4 holes for the windows. So you can kind of see this is kind of the best before and after shot. And then attached to that, you've got a flat roofed structure that wraps around with a green sedum roof. It's fairly modest in scale, and there would be still views through to the kind of rear facade of the host building of significance, which would be kind of less obscured because of the demolition of the more modern outcrop elements. And I've just included this visual because it just sort of shows, this red line shows the slope here. If you can see that slope going down, then the red line shows the slope. So they've you can see where they make it a flat roof extension here. So that's the alteration, which isn't obviously immediately visible from Small Lane because it's to the rear. But we find generally the overall finish of that structure to be quite in keeping, obviously they're using the pennant stone rubble walling, and they're going to have recessed windows. Again, they would be, the details of which would be secured to ensure a quality finish. Officers recommend the approval of the listed building consent subject to conditions. And again, it's just sort of in response to the statement, it's we don't feel that this undermines the application that was determined at the committee on October the 23rd. Whilst we find the listed building works to be acceptable, we still feel that the proposal fails to comply with policy DM6, and we still stand by the loss of the public house. Yeah, that's a separate matter, and we're still recommending refusal of that, and that's been refused. But in terms of listed building, we're happy with this case. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Can I just ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, because I think on one of the front pages it says refuse.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was the first thing I was supposed to say.
Don't worry. Yeah. Can you just clarify that now?
Yes. No, the recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions.
There is one copy of something that, in a couple of instances where it might say refuse, but the officer's recommendation is to approve. Yeah. It is a strange situation we're in, being asked to approve an application where we've refused a related application. So maybe we'll unpack that, but let's get some clarifying questions. Richard, do you want to go ahead?
Your colleague at the agenda conference explained the strange, somewhat alternative universe where this could happen, of course. Could I inquire whether we've received any communication from the applicant they wish this to be determined?
Whether they wish it?
Yeah.
Whether they wish
it to be determined. One would have imagined the refusal last month was sufficient.
Is part of the question also whether they might have withdrawn the planning application? Because they haven't, obviously, withdrawn it.
So they haven't withdrawn the planning application, and they would be within their rights to appeal that. So if they appeal the application and that appeal is allowed, so that they don't agree with the officer recommendation and the committee decision to refuse that case, then they could ultimately, if this were also granted approval, carry out all of the works. That application has been refused solely on the loss of public house, and they haven't withdrawn it. But we don't know that they will appeal it, but they wanted to proceed with the listed building application, so that opportunity.
Any other questions of clarification that anyone has? Serena, go on.
I suppose it's somewhat similar, really. Might have been covered off, but it does seem a little bit odd. So what is the use of one application without the other? So I think we just covered this, haven't we? So if the other planning application is refused and this is approved and they can't do the works, it just seems a little strange unless they go to appeal. Am I right? Sorry to get you to repeat yourself.
It's not an ideal process, but standalone, this can be looked at. So they could, if this were to be approved, they could carry out internal alterations to the listed building. It would also sort of give them listed building consent for the other works identified, so they could, even if the full planning application was dismissed at appeal, they could then reapply for full planning permission to change the windows, and they'll already have listed building consent for that, and it would likely therefore be favourable. It's a little bit disjointed and not ideal that the two aren't being seen together, but quite simply the change of use and everything that was discussed previously still stands, and there's still, we feel, a strong recommendation, a strong refusal there that covers the key issue, but we have to break down what we can actually cover under this listed building application separately from that.
Okay, Zoe, go ahead.
So the concern, I suppose, is that if we were to approve this and then they got the appeal of the other one, then our objections about the public house being lost would essentially be overturned, essentially. So what material considerations would there be for rejecting this application?
So the change of use, so the loss of the public house we determined under the previous committee, and there's always a risk that an inspector could disagree with the findings. That will remain the case whatever happens with this listed building application. This listed building application can't consider the change of use. It literally can consider those items I set out, so the demolitions, and we would actually have to identify where the harm is. And our expert in conservation, so the conservation officer, hasn't identified any harm here at all. We find that, you know, for the various reasons set out in my presentation. So we do have to kind of look at them in isolation from each other, even though you're right, it doesn't seem logical to do so. And we do prefer to assess these things side by side, but it's just the way this application has kind of run, unfortunately.
So in essence, what you're saying is the proposed changes as part of the listed building consent. We can't make a judgment about whether those specific proposals make the hub less viable or more viable or anything like that. You're saying that that's not something we should consider.
Essentially, yeah.
Guy, you've got your hand up, go on.
I suppose, well, I had two queries, Chair, apologies. I'll try and deal with the substantive one first. I'm slightly worried, having happened to have sat in on the subject on the previous version of this committee as well, that we might have, I don't know if it's still called this, what you call the creeping fettering of the committee's discretion. That's to say, I remember that the discussion last time around this specific site ranged quite widely. There were concerns about the effect on residential amenity. There were concerns around the fact that the density of HMO properties around it was already above the 10% threshold, and this, whilst not being an HMO itself, could have the potential to make a substantial contribution to that harm. There were concerns raised about transport, but the reason for refusal, as the committee was advised, was locked in around DM6, the strongest reason, not the only, but the strongest reason for refusal. And I would like just to get some reassurance from the officers that if another planning application were to come through, we wouldn't in some way be bound by a precedent that ruled out either those concerns or in fact any additional heritage concerns that might come up as a result of a new application because of decisions made so far. That is to say, every case remains taken on its merits. The next case involving this site that comes for us would be subject to the same assessment, irrespective of the decision that we made today. In other words, next time, if the previous application came back, it could still be turned down on the basis of DM6, but it could also be turned down on the basis of loss of amenity or a heritage issue, irrespective of the decision made today. And I'll come to the other one in just a sec.
So I think in considering any potential future planning application, previous decisions would be a material consideration, but as with all applications, they would all be considered, on their own merits, and we would have to assess the particular issues that may arise from that particular proposal at that time in the context of whatever the adopted policies are, kind of when that happens. So I hope that provides sort of some reassurance, and really in terms of the listed building consent, it really is just only the narrow issue of the impact of the works on the listed building that we're considering now. All the concerns that were raised previously around the change of use are matters that, were duly assessed under the consideration of the full planning application, which was refused.
That's great, thank you. And my other question, apologies, I don't want to labour this point if this is not an issue, but if it is, I would really like the committee to know about it potentially now. I am aware and appreciating it was raised by the officer already, but there are two places on the report that refer to this item as being recommended for refusal. And I am just slightly concerned as to what our legal position would be if in the future we had either organisations or members of the public going around and saying, how it was recommended for refusal, just like last time when you refused it. And as a result, we put in no statement, we asked no questions, we took no moves to make our point clear, only to find that that wasn't the case. And I would just like some reassurance that our legal position has been assessed and is as strong as it can be under these conditions. In other words, there is no risk to be mitigated by, for example, deferring a decision here until the next committee to ensure the public does have the opportunity, being aware of the actual reality of the recommendation, to then make their case.
Okay. If you want to respond to that in some way, or just Jonathan want to do it?
I mean, just to start off, yeah, it is unfortunately regrettable that the top sheet still does refer to refusal. Unfortunately, that was only picked up at a late stage, which is why the officer did cover it in the presentation. Also, I'm aware from the discussion previously, we'd obviously flagged as part of the last committee that we were minded to recommend approval of the listed building consent. Hence, it kind of coming back today. I'm aware there were a number of objectors in the gallery as part of that meeting as well. But it isn't something we sought specific advice on because we have only discovered it at a late stage, unfortunately.
Okay. Serena, and I think maybe we'll move to debate after that. Yep.
Yeah, one very quick point. I note that on page 113, the Officers Report, the Conservation Advisory Panel objects to the development on listed building grounds, and I always understood that the curtilage of a listed building was within that listed development classification under legislation. So you've got development proposed in the curtilage. Would that not harm the listed building under the listed building regime?
It's something that we would consider, but we don't find that there is any harm there. So the Conservation Officer hasn't found harm. But you're right that we do look at what is listed by curtilage, and that's why this ancillary building, for example, is being considered here. The Conservation Officer has confirmed that the new block would not be listed when it's built and would not be listed by curtilage. And I think that's actually at their discretion to decide when that would become under assessment under a listed building application. And they've said that that element wouldn't. So it's all looked at, but we feel like from Small Lane, you would still retain views through of the rear facade, of the significance of the rear section of the listed building. But that, I think, we did get more recent comments from the Conservation Officer, who also confirmed that that the rear of the pub itself is of low significance, having less obvious architectural or historic character to the street frontages. So they've just confirmed for those reasons that they further wouldn't object to that.
Okay.
I always thought a listed building is a listed building, grade 2 in this case, and if it's a certain distance from the building boundary that encapsulates that curtilage, which is protected, but I'm no expert.
To be honest, I think it's quite complex, isn't it? There's a lot of case law as to when something is listed by curtilage, and I think, again, it comes down to a bit case by case and at the local authority's Conservation Officer's discretion.
Okay. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to move on to the debate. So has anyone got anything to say about this? I might start, actually, if that's okay. I don't see much reason to not go with the officer recommendations here. It seems like the changes that are proposed aren't going to be problematic for the actual maintaining of the historic aspects of the site. So I would be in favour of going with the officer recommendation. Anyone else want to make a comment or a point? I'll go with Zoe and then Richard.
I will reluctantly be voting for this. When there is no material considerations for refusal, I do think we have to judge it based on the merits. I think we just have to, obviously I am very concerned about the loss of the public house, but that relates to a different planning application, and we're just going to have to wait and see what the applicants do, whether they withdraw it completely or they amend it so that it does preserve the public house. But regardless, that's neither here nor there when it comes to this application. We just have to look at it based on the merits. There is no material considerations. I don't think we have any grounds for refusal.
Thank you, Zoe. Richard?
I will be consistent, Chairman. I invariably vote for or against I rarely abstain because I prefer to leave that to others, notably Lib Dem. Sorry, Sarah. But you will recall in October, I was strongly opposed to the change of use, primarily on over-concentration of student users locally. But that was roared out on advice from officers who proposed we refuse it on the pub grounds, which I believed sincerely would not be defendable at appeal, so I abstained. The recommendations from the officers today, I don't believe one could actually oppose the grounds. They are logical, I can see that. But I sincerely fear this may be used, consent could be used today as a catalyst for actually providing a backdoor for consent by appeal. And for that reason, I will abstain today.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else want to comment on this one? Yeah, oh, sorry, Al, yeah, you had your hand up, didn't you?
Yeah, I'd actually like to add that in its current state, it seems run down, it seems damaged, it's a nice store. So yeah, if works can be done to improve this site, then I'd also reluctantly like to agree. But I also share the concerns of Richard, as in we don't know what comes next. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that.
Just a quick question. What would happen if everyone had abstained?
I think that's a process question we'll cross to. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Zoe. Thank you. Anyone else got any comments on this? Or should we... Okay. Guy, you seem to have half a hand up. Go on.
Chair, I find myself still not having made my mind up. Apologies. I'm working on it. I'm genuinely a little bit concerned about this legal question and the legal risk it might pose to the committee. I'm minded. I won't be heartbroken if I'm defeated, but I'm minded if the initial recommendation falls to propose a deferral, simply to ensure that the accurate officer's recommendation can be advertised to enable people to put in public forum, put in public statements, or other organisations. If I thought we were absolutely going one way or the other on this, I don't think it would make any difference. But I think if the committee in any way feels this to be a borderline case, I would say let's ensure that we have heard from everyone who wants to say something on this in light of a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. I would just say, personally, I think we've deferred this from the previous committee in a sense, so I think we've already gone through the deferral hoop. I think you could say we could do that again, but I don't think that that's necessarily a good idea from my perspective, but others might differ. Any other comments on the application? Yep, Serena, and I think we'll then, unless there's any more, we'll then move to a recommendation.
Yes, I think I'm concerned about this, as for a lot of other people have said, it's sort of a gateway for the developer to start works immediately. From what the report says, it's on page 110, the internal works could start immediately, and it's a means to an end, but I know that that's not what's up for consideration here. I am genuinely concerned about the impact on the listed building, particularly on the curtilage. I'm not really convinced by the arguments. It's a really difficult one. So I'm minded to refuse at the moment.
Thank you. Has anyone got any more comments they'd like to make, or shall I move a recommendation? Okay. Sorry?
It feels that there is an alternative motive behind this application to get the previous application pushed through, and I've asked prior if there are any material considerations to refuse this, because the last thing we want is for an appeal against the council. But obviously, I think, even if Richard Eddy is abstaining, there's obviously something to kind of like look at. And is there anything whatsoever that the officers can say as a way of just making sure that, if we do reject this, we're not going against leaving the council open? Is there any way? Because I think we're all quite concerned about this.
Understood. Do you want to respond to that at all? I mean, it feels to me like we kind of have to make the decision. The officers have given their perspective, but I mean, is there anything else you want to add that hasn't been said? They're thinking about it as well, right?
I think it is difficult that the two applications have been separated from one another. The key concerns that everyone seems to have relate to student concentrations, transport and the loss of the public house still, but they were all covered off under the full planning application. We really do need to look at this case in isolation. I don't know if it helps Councillor Guy Pulteney at all, but there were only a very limited handful number of objections on listed building grounds specifically, which I know that number still matters, but it helps alleviate concerns a little, perhaps. I think the issue is in part that with the full planning application, we also presented on the last slide a look about the fact that there was no harm to the listed building. And we talked about the words omitting the optimum viable use text, if you remember that. Sorry, it is quite a complex case, but we didn't identify harm in that respect with the full planning application. So the reasons that the full planning application was refused was on the loss of public house. It wasn't on the fact that the harm to the listed, but there's still a supplementary assessment that goes into the full planning application that, whilst that case was refused, wasn't added as a refusal reason at that point to that committee. So I feel like now we're sort of limited really in the assessment, which is unfortunate, and that's part of the fact that these cases have been separated from one another that has made this quite tricky and quite a unique case. But I think what would be important in making your decision will be thinking about what that, if you were minded to refuse, what that refusal reason would actually be. That's all we would want to be really clear on at this point.
Okay. I'm minded that we do need to move on because we do have another application today, and I'm aware that we've spent a little bit of time on this, not just today, but also previously under the different application. So I am going to move a motion in accordance with the recommendation, which was to approve this listed building consent. Have I got a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Al. So Al seconded that. So we'll just go round and vote on that as a proposal. And again, I've done it randomly, so be prepared for anything. So, Councillor Eddy is first.
Abstain.
Councillor Hornshan.
I have to approve, I guess.
4. Okay. Councillor Classic.
4.
Councillor Breyer, that's me. I'm 4. Councillor Al Maghrabi.
4.
Councillor Beat.
4.
Councillor Ralston.
Abstain.
Councillor Freeman.
4.
And Councillor Pulteney.
Against.
Thank you. So that does carry, and so we are approving the application. Thank you, everyone. We'll have 5 minutes break again, just for a little comfort break, and come back at 25 past. Please do come back at 25 past. Hello, welcome back. Thanks everyone for coming back on time. We have sadly lost Councillor Poultney, who had to leave for another engagement. We are still going ahead, obviously. So we've got one more item, which is Charlton Lane. We should start with the public forum for this item. I can see Councillor Mark Weston is here. Do you want to go ahead with your first with your statement?
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry to prolong your meeting for calling this in. I don't often call applications into the planning committee, so this does show my serious concern on this one. The development itself, as it would stand now, would be to put 3 dormer bungalows just off Roseacre, which almost doubles the size of Roseacre. I have serious concerns when it comes to the traffic and transport management of it. And I've got concerns, which I've put in there, DM23. I've got concerns about the development of private garden, which is DM21. And obviously the local character and distinctness of the area, DM26. What I've also got concerns about is I think there are a couple of omissions within your report. Previously, applications have come forward for this site, and they've been refused at the inspector level. And the report itself is saying things like the inspector did not consider overlooking or the impact on neighbours to be of serious concern. That's actually not quite what the inspector said. What the inspector clearly said was on it, as I am dismissing the appeal on other matters, I have not pursued this further. That's actually quite different from saying that there were no concerns to begin with. There are problems here when you talk about access. There are problems here when you talk about overlooking, overdevelopment, the character of the area, access to site. When the inspector herself went down there, she said actually she couldn't get down the lane because of the amount of parked cars there already, which does show you the potential problem. Now, the development itself is for apparently 3 retirement bungalows, and yet we'll have 6 parking spaces and 6 bike racks. That's more vehicles than in a Tour de France team, I think, in total. So I'm not quite sure the retirement bungalow, which is not conditioned, is actually going to be what they're actually going to be used for. So I urge you to please reject this on the grounds of overdevelopment and what I've listed in the statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Can I go to the next statement, which is C2, Surosh Hailani? Is Surosh here?
Yes. Is it on? Yeah. For over 30 years, I've called 13 Charlton Lane my home, a place filled with cherished memories. However, I'm retired, visually impaired, and under medication for a heart condition. My current house is nearly 100 years old and is difficult for me to maintain. The issues of damp and mold have led me to seek a modern, energy-efficient, and elderly-friendly home where I can live comfortably. It's also my heartfelt wish to have my sons nearby, ideally in the 2 bungalows within my garden. This would provide me with essential support while allowing me to maintain my independence. We will take every precaution to ensure safety, biodiversity, and sustainability. Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much, Surosh. And then C3 is John Blake. Is John here? Yep, go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm the architect for the proposal, and thank you for allowing me to speak in support of this application. The main areas of concern expressed by the local residents and the ward council have been covered by your planning officer's report and by my written statement in front of you. Although for clarity's sake, I'd just like to confirm that there are 4 parking spaces on site to comply with policy, although the existing garage could also accommodate an additional 2 cars. I'd now like to emphasise the need for this particular type of dwelling in the less densely populated areas of Bristol, such as Brentry. Only last week, the Old People's Housing Task Force published the report which calls for a new national strategy for an ageing population to strengthen the need for older people's housing. This reinforces the findings of the Mayhew report of 2022, which states that retirement housing helps older people stay healthier for longer, it reduces the burden on the NHS and frees up housing lower down the ladder, and that if everybody lived in homes that were appropriate in size for their needs, 50,000 fewer homes would need to be built each year. I therefore urge you to approve this proposal that will make a small contribution to this much needed type of accommodation.
Thank you very much, John. That concludes the public forum for this item. Thank you very much. We'll move to the officer presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. The application is for the demolition of an existing house and the construction of 3 dormer bungalows and that's use class C3, and it includes altering access off Rose Acre. This is the existing site, and I've roughly circled the site in red there. I'll show you a more detailed site plan in a moment. You can see the current bungalow that's there on site and the parking area, which is accessed via the private lane, which is shown again on the Google Maps image there. It's worth saying that in terms of ownership, this has been raised by people in the public forum, albeit not by people who have spoken today. It's worth saying that there's a small strip of land between the site and between Rose Acre, which would be needed for access purposes. And as far as officers understand, the ownership of this small strip of land is unknown, but the applicant has publicised their proposals and completed the correct ownership certificate, which they need to complete as part of the planning process. So officers are satisfied that the applicant's done what they need to do in this regard. Moving on, next slide. Here's the existing bungalow, and you can see the red line boundary there on the right of the screen. It's also worth saying that the red line boundary contains two properties. It's the bungalow that's also to be demolished, and also an annex, or what was previously an annex to number 13, but this building now benefits from a certificate of lawfulness, allowing it to be used as a standalone dwelling, and that certificate of lawfulness was granted on the basis that the applicant had submitted enough information to demonstrate that it had been used as an independent dwelling for over 4 years, and that means that it's immune from enforcement action. In terms of planning history, this is a site plan showing the previous application, which was for 4 dormer bungalows, including the altering of access off Rose Acre, so there were a total of 4 dwellings there. And that application was refused under delegated powers for 5 reasons, which are shown on the screen here. So it was overdevelopment of the site, it was impact on neighbours in terms of overbearing to Charlton Grove and overlooking to number 5 Rose Acre. It was also refused because safe access had not been demonstrated and that there wasn't sufficient bin and cycle storage shown. There was also no information on surface water runoff and no information on ecology and no biodiversity net gain demonstrated. This application was then dismissed at appeal, and I'm going through this because the inspector's report is a material consideration. So the inspector only dismissed the appeal on 2 grounds, and that was the overdevelopment ground and that safe access and cycle and bin storage had not been demonstrated. But the inspector did consider that other issues could be dealt with via conditions. And just to pick up on the point made earlier by Councillor Weston on the amenity and overlooking, I'll read this section from the inspector's report. First floor dormer windows within the proposed dwellings would face towards number 5 and its front garden, so that's number 5 Rose Acre. The proposed first floor windows would provide light into the upstairs bedroom. Conditions requiring obscure glazing and limiting the opening of the window would ensure that overlooking from the proposed development does not occur. However, as I am dismissing the appeal on other matters, I have not pursued this further. So it's just worth noting that the inspector there thought that a condition could cover the issue, although the inspector did highlight that it was an issue that needed to be taken into account. Moving on now, this is a site plan for the proposed development for 3 bungalows. So you can see that there's 1 semi-detached pair and an addition of a detached bungalow. There's access for 3 parking spaces from Rose Acre to the south, which is there. I don't know if you can see my cursor. No, you probably can't. But anyway, it's to the south of the site. And there's also access along the private lane to the parking space shown on the east of the plan. And this access already exists, and the access serves the existing garage, which would be to remain. There are 3 semi-detached bungalows, as shown. Getting my words mixed up. The semi-detached bungalows are 3 bedrooms, and that's shown on this plan here. And then there's a further 4-bedroom detached bungalow, shown there on the plans. In terms of representation, we've seen Councillor Weston's referral to committee, and there are also neighbour objections.
set out below. People are concerned about overdevelopment of the site, loss of privacy to Charlton Grove, pressures on parking on Rose Acre, and the impact on the entrance to the annex that's now a separate dwelling. People are also concerned about removal of greenery and surface water drainage. In terms of our assessment of the case, the officer's recommendation is to approve. Since the appeal, it's worth noting that the scale of development has been reduced from 4 bungalows to 3, and so that covers the inspector's concerns about overdevelopment of the site. You'll see that there's a gap left between the Charlton Grove properties and the detached bungalows, so that alleviates a lot of concerns that officers had then. It's also worth noting that the applicants submitted tracking diagrams showing that cars can safely enter and exit the site and have room to manoeuvre on the site so they can come out in forward gear, and that was something that the inspector was concerned about. In addition, bin and bike storage has been shown, as you can see on the plan. The applicant is also proposing to retain more hedgerow than was previously retained, and also proposing tree planting on the site to demonstrate a biodiversity net gain. Referring back to the inspector's report, the inspector considered that all other issues could be dealt with via condition, and so officers have taken that on board and followed that through, suggesting conditions as set out in my report to committee. So overall, the officer's recommendation is for approval, and officers consider that issues can be dealt with via conditions, and other information is set out in my report. Hopefully that's clear, but any questions, I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone got any questions? Richard, go ahead.
In Councillor Weston's public forum statement, he alleged that the authority, in his view, hadn't taken sufficient account of our policy 20 with DM 21, 26, and I missed the earlier one he mentioned. I just wanted you to respond to that.
Yes, I did I have a slide on DM 21? In terms of DM21, that is loss of private gardens. And we have taken that into account. I've set it out in under key issues, so it's under principle of development. So there's already a residential dwelling on the site, so we have to take that into account. And the provisions of DM21 do, however, apply because it's partially a garden site and it's partially garden land that would be developed. So there are 3 parts to DM21, and the policy states that development involving loss of gardens will not be permitted unless either the proposal would represent a more efficient use of land at a location where higher densities are appropriate, or the development would result in a significant improvement to the urban design of the area, or 3, the proposal is an extension to an existing dwelling and would retain adequate area of functional garden. So it's not the third one. In terms of the first one relates to efficient use of land at a location where higher densities are appropriate. And this policy flows from policy BCS 20, which seeks higher densities of development around the city centres or close to other centres or along main public transport routes. So in this case, the site lies within walking distance of bus stops on Knowle Lane, which serve 2 buses, and also within just over 500 metres walk of a further bus stop which serves buses 4 and T7 and 623. So there's a number of bus stops in this area. And the site also lies approximately 250 metres walk from Crow Lane District Centre, which contains a number of shops and other amenities. So overall, officers feel that the principle of a slightly more dense area of development is acceptable because it's close to those public transport routes and within walking distance of that Crow Lane centre. So officers consider that that first part of the policy is met. And DM21 also states that the design of the development needs to be acceptable in all cases, and that's covered in my report on the key issue of design. Officers are satisfied with that.
Okay, I've got a quick question. Can we condition sort of one of the things that was raised was Rose Acre will become a bit more trafficked, maybe. So is there anything we do to guard against, so potentially double yellow lines that would make that access into Roseacre a bit more clear, that that's not a place to park? Because I think that was one of the concerns that was raised.
I think it's worth saying that the Transport Development Management Officer didn't raise any concerns about the impact of parking on Roseacre. Neither the Transport Development Management Officer or the Inspector were concerned about that. What they were concerned was adequate turning within the site, so that you weren't getting so many cars on the site that people would be kind of blocked in or wouldn't be able to turn safely because there was another car in the way. But because the applicant submitted that tracking diagram, as shown there, that's shown. So in terms of the double yellow lines, that's a separate process. I think it's done under a TRO, so it's the TRO process. So
it's not something we can condition anyway?
I don't think it's something, no, we couldn't condition it, no.
That's fine. Any other questions, clarification? Serena?
I just wanted to clarify the net gain in the number of properties. So you've got one there, not two at the moment. So we're looking at 2 additional properties, that's all, is it? And also what the actual size gain is in terms of footprint as compared to what's there at the moment, if you see what I mean.
Ooh.
In terms of the additional amount of properties, yes, there's one property there at the moment and 2 additional properties, so there would be 3 there in total. In terms of the actual floor space, I can look that up. It should be on the application. Okay, that's measurement of the site. Okay, I've got some figures here from the SIL form. So the existing gross internal area is 211 square metres. The gross internal area to be lost by demolition is 181, and the total area proposed is 304. So there would be a net additional gross internal area following development of 123 square metres. I can put that up on screen if people would find it useful.
So there's a net addition of 123 square metres?
Yes, yeah.
That's the answer to your question, yeah. That's fine. Any other questions or clarification before we move to the debate? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah.
So I'm not really seeing any proposed designs from it all. I'm seeing a lot of, obviously, like the blueprints, which is great, obviously, but I'm not really seeing what they would look like. And whilst that's not necessarily a huge thing, I suppose I'm just a bit... There's something just not quite sitting right with me, because it feels like we're losing a lot of the green space. And I know that, you know, we need to do that if you're putting in more houses, because you need to make way for cars and bikes and all of that. But it just... It doesn't feel like a very thorough application compared to others that we've seen, if that's fair to say.
I've put some elevation drawings up on the screen. So that's the semi-detached ones, and that's the detached ones. We do have floor plans as well. The site plan was included in the pack, but I can put some other floor plans up on the screen if necessary. We do have those floor plans.
Have you been in here like all day with us, or have you just come in for this one application?
I was in for the first couple.
Yeah. So you know how like we saw the projections of what the old tavern was going to look like and stuff like that. That gave us a real feel of what it would look like if it was, accepted and stuff like that. We don't really have. We've got these things here, and we've got the blueprints, but we don't have any of those projections of what it would actually look like.
I know. Okay, right, yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes it's useful to see things in 3D. It's useful to have CGI images. The applicant isn't required to submit those. It's not part of our validation requirements. And so whilst sometimes it can be useful, we're satisfied that we can make an assessment as officers on the basis of the information that's shown, which is the elevation drawings and the floor plans. And we've discussed this with the urban design officer, who's satisfied with the design proposed. So I don't have anything else. No. Anything you want to add, Jonathan? That's all. Yeah.
Okay. A couple of other questions going along the line. Let's do. Carty, can you put your mic on? Your mic on.
Sorry. And the only other question I had was talking about the floor plans. I just remembered when you showed the master plans on page 154, which would be assuming it would be this development. I've got the pictures of the first application we had for some reason. So
I did include that in order to show the difference, because one of the main issues was the fact that officers considered that the site was overdeveloped. So this was an addition, just showing this is how. In fact, I've got a slide.
I think we've got a slight misunderstanding with that. I think what we're saying is that in the original documents, it just showed the first application that we heard today.
Oh, okay.
And it has been. If you go to the amendment sheet, it does have all of the Charlton Lane ones on there as well. So if you go to the amendment sheet, you'll find them. Is that okay? Alan and Sarah. Actually, it was the other way around.
I just wanted to ask if it's affordable housing for older people. Like, is it within their like price range, and does it trend in the rates that most retirement homes would rent their properties for?
I'll try and answer that point. So the applicant has said that the proposals would be for retirement homes, but the use class is C3, which is residential dwellings, and which can encompass a number of things. So we haven't specifically required them to be, and it's be unreasonable for us to do so, we haven't specifically required them to be marketed as retirement homes or anything like that. If the applicant chooses to do so, that's absolutely fine, but it's fine if they won't. So we're not securing that as part of the planning process. In terms of affordable housing, there are three houses proposed, and that falls below the threshold where we have to secure a requirement for affordable housing with capital A, capital H in formal terms.
No, that's public forum.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that actually kind of answers my question, but I was just wanted to check because I thought that in the applicant's statement there was a mention of it being for his sons or his family, but then the application was for a retirement property. But I don't know, rereading his statement, I think I might have misinterpreted that comment. And actually, if they're not designated retirement properties, then I think it's immaterial anyway.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you need to respond to that, or is that okay?
Did my previous comment answer that question, you think? Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm minded to move on to the debate because we've already probably had quite a lot of questions there. Who would like to speak about this? Richard, go ahead. Put your hand up straight away.
Thanks, Chairman. I must say, I think our general DC process is excellent. Obviously, lead members are verbally briefed and we can ask questions 2 weeks or so in advance, about a week before we have the written report, and it read quite convincingly, to be fair to me, but in policy terms, etc. We then actually have public forum submissions, so we can hear the public's views and ward councillors here. And then we quiz the officer after your presentation. So hopefully, through that process, that actually allows us to see the wood for the trees. Unfortunately, sometimes residents' reality conflicts or crashes into a planning policy. I've got a feeling there are elements of this here. Only a couple of agenda conferences ago, the transport development manager admitted to us that with their resources, we appreciate they're limited, they really didn't have time to really look at smaller schemes like this, I would suggest. And so the absence of criticism, which the case officer cites, doesn't convince me that residents' fears and realities can be dismissed. And whilst I'm even in the suburbs, I think we need to actually accept an increased density to reflect our need for housing. There is actually some degree in our policies, of course, of having it in character for that community. And although since the appeal, which was dismissed, we have seen a reduced density of the latest scheme, I'm not convinced it's actually not overbearing and doesn't represent an over-concentration here. And we've heard actually this small cul-de-sac, the impact it would have. So I do fear that although I initially read the officer's report and it seemed quite convincing, I do fear, and I'm not convinced that it satisfies my fears there. Finally, if committee is minded to approve this now, I do hope, even though it's a small scheme, we're trying to put in place a robust construction management plan, or the equivalent thereof, to minimise the nuisance for the neighbours, of course.
Thank you, Richard. Al, were you next? Did you want to speak? Yes? Yeah.
I'd just like to say that I understand the concerns of the local residents about overdevelopment, but like this is planned to this is planned to be for old people. So I don't think that there will be much in the way of loud music or parties or hike interference in their cul-de-sac. And I also don't think it will devalue their like homes. And I agree with Richard in that Bristol is in the midst of a housing crisis, and we do desperately need these like extra homes. So yeah, I'd be voting for this.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, Serena, and then Zoe.
Yes, I really think that's a strong argument about the retirement homes. We've got a massive shortage of suitable homes. I have an elderly mother who doesn't live in Bristol, but she's really struggling to find appropriate accommodation that she could then downsize in, and that frees up family homes. On the other hand, of course, this is essentially garden land development, and I think we have to watch out for that pattern. There are other parts of the country where they've had a real issue with this. So it's just to watch out for that trend so that any design is sensitive to biodiversity, but you say that biodiversity net gains have been achieved, but just bearing that in mind. But in essence, we're talking about one additional dwelling, I think, and I'm content to support the application myself. Although I do sympathise with residents' concerns. It's never easy having anything built next door. I think a construction management plan, as you've said, Councillor Reddy, a robust one, is a sensible way forward.
Okay, I might say something. Oh, actually, go on, you had to go first then.
Very brief point, I promise you that. And it's not even a political promise, so you can believe it, Chairman. Just in response to Al's comment, although I believe we have in the past given consent for some quite personal permissions, I'm not sure we currently do, and we don't generally, because actually there's nothing to stop the new dwellers or the intended dwellers selling it on in a year or two. So we have to be assured of the impact on the neighbours, any overbearing, any noise long term. It's not just a short term situation.
Good. Okay, go on in. Yeah, I'll do my bit.
So I will be voting for this. I think my concern is that it's not a retirement home. It's not being marketed as a retirement home. And actually, as someone with some mobility issues myself, actually being able to potentially buy a bungalow one day would be lovely. But I think we need to stop saying it's a retirement home. It can, as Richard Eddy has already identified, it could be inhabited by an elderly couple or an elderly person, and then be sold off again to perhaps someone younger. That's not a bad thing, but I just would like to make the distinction that this isn't necessarily a retirement home, and so it kind of feels slightly misadvertised as being one. Okay. But I will be voting for it because I don't think there are any material considerations, and at the end of the day, more homes is always a good thing.
Thanks, Zoe. I'm just going to say that I had mention of the Tour de France. It looks like the Tour de France there. Great. I think we need more people to be cycling, and I think it's quite frustrating in the beginning process of the application when adequate cycle provision isn't provided. And I think Transport Development Management have done a good job to get involved and make that happen. I don't see any reason why this isn't a good use of land. There are lots of areas, as Richard said, of suburban Bristol that could be densified, and I think this fits that. The real challenge is to make sure all of those places are connected, because we want people to be using other forms of transport, tackle that car dependency in these sort of locations. People need to kind of have different options that aren't just the private car. So that's, I'm in favour, I think I'll vote for. Any other comments from anyone, or should we move to a recommendation? Let me get my thing up. I like to just read the thing off just to make sure I'm doing the right thing here, sorry. Bear with me 1 second. No, I've completely lost it. Anyway, I move the recommendation of the officers to approve this. Shall we... have I got a seconder? Zoe was quick there, so let's go with Zoe. And let's just do, again, a random list. Sorry, everyone, if you don't like that. So let's just go around and say with you are for or against approving this. First is Councillor Freeman.
For, and that's great because I need to go, thanks.
Okay, goodbye. Councillor Breyer, that's me, I'm for. Councillor Hornshin.
For.
Councillor Peat.
For.
Councillor Classic.
For.
Councillor Eddy.
Against.
Councillor Al McGraby.
For.
Councillor Bonney's not here, and Councillor Ralston.
For.
Thank you, so that is carried. And I think that concludes the meeting for today. Thank you everyone for attending, thank you everyone in the public gallery for attending, and thanks a lot for the officers for your presentations. Thank you.